There you go.
Are we in business?
Sure.
Beautiful. All right. So when I'm trying to decide what I'm going to talk about on Wednesday nights, believe it or not, I don't just pull it out of my butt. All right. I pray about it. I pray about whether God wants me to just speak on like a specific message, whether He wants me to talk about maybe a theme or do a study or a series. And I felt like God kept on telling me that I was supposed to share my testimony. And I was like, no. I kept on telling God, no. Like, I need to do something better than that. My testimony, that's boring. No one wants to hear about me. And then I just felt like God kept on saying, no, I want you to share your testimony. I want you to share your testimony. And I'm like, dude, like no, no one can even like relate to my testimony. I'm like sitting there arguing with God in my head. This is not that long ago, guys. This is like 2 days ago. Yes, I still argue with God. I was like, no, this is dumb. And then I was like, whatever, fine. So I start writing my testimony. By the way, I've like never really shared my testimony. You know, I've told it to a couple of people. This is my first time actually like sharing it publicly. So I started writing it, and as I was writing it, felt like God started to just like speak to me and started putting things in my notes and in my outline that I didn't even, like I've never even thought about before. And it was funny, as I was writing this, I started to look at my own testimony differently. So that was pretty cool. So I don't know who this is for, but it's for someone. God wants to speak to you tonight. So, some of you guys maybe are like, what is a testimony? Raise your hand. Hey, be honest. It's okay. Be honest if you're like, I don't know what a testimony even is. That's okay. Alright. You can talk to me after it. So if you don't know what a testimony is, that's alright. Basically, a testimony is just you sharing about what God has done in your life. Alright? It's a powerful and it's a super like important tool that every single Christian can and should use. Alright? It's one of the most powerful ways to share the gospel. I probably should just grab another mic, shouldn't I?
Yeah. No, it's fine.
You sure? Alright. Because, I mean, how many guys have ever tried to share your faith with someone and then they ask like a tough question? They were like, you know, we actually talked about this at Boys Life Group. You started to share your faith and they start asking you these tough questions like, oh, do you really believe that the Bible says this? Or the Bible says this, like what do you think about that? And they ask you these tough questions and maybe you don't have the answer. What's so cool about sharing your testimony is you can say, you know what, I might not know the answer to that, but I know what God's done in my life. I know how God has performed miracles in my life. I know how God has changed me. I've seen God do this. I've seen God do this. That's what's so cool about your testimony. Alright? Psalms 22, verse 22, if we get that up on the screen, it says, it's the first slide, there we go. I will praise you to all my brothers. I will stand up before the congregation and testify of the wonderful things you have done. That's the importance of your testimony. And now sometimes it can be easy to think, my story's not that exciting. I was born in Edwardsville, Illinois. Woof. Or I was born in Springfield, Missouri. Woof. You're like, that's not a very exciting story. You know, I never sold drugs and killed someone and then turned to Jesus and now I'm a pastor. Like, I've got a boring testimony. But listen, God has chosen to work in your life in a particular way for a specific reason. Remember, you're testifying His work. When you share your testimony, it's not talking about how awesome you are. It's not talking about how bad you are. It's talking about how great God is. Alright? It's celebrating His work. And that's something to be celebrated. Alright? So, I'm going to tell my story. So I was born in a Christian family. Alright? How Christian, you might ask? I was born at Bible college. Alright? Look, I got a picture up here. When I was born, both my parents were still in college. Alright? At Bible school. They were married. Alright? I was born inside of marriage. 6 weeks though. And never mind, I was going to say something. My parents had one more year of college. I was a little baby up in that joint, and then they moved back to Iowa. I was raised in the land of the corn. My dad was a school teacher. My mom did in-home daycare. It's not exactly what you would call an exciting childhood. I grew up going to church. Grew up playing sports. I got some pictures of little animal, you know. I grew up wrestling. Yup. Oh, look at that. Look at that guy. It looks like a freaking thumb.
Oh my God.
I think my face looks really dumb in that. That's why I included that. I'm like, I played football. You know the vibes. So, a lot of you guys can probably relate. You grew up in the suburbs. You played some sports. Hang out with friends all the time. Maybe you go to church. And, you know, my relationship with God, it was important to me. At least I thought so. But I teetered a lot like back and forth between caring more about my faith or caring about what people thought about me. And, you know, I'm sure a lot of you guys can relate. You know, I was never the most popular kid in school, but I would definitely say that I was popular. I was friends with kind of everyone. I was kind of like a chameleon. Like I was friends with the cool jocks. I was cool with the potheads. I was cool with the rednecks. I was cool with the nerds. I was cool with the kids who like wore costumes to school and thought they were mushrooms.
Oh no!
Listen, I was friends. I was friends kind of with everyone. And you know, I could have used that gift in that way that God wired me a lot more effectively than I could have. I could have used that gift of being able to relate to pretty much anyone and talk to them about anything, but I didn't. I was really actually afraid to share my faith with people in high school because I wanted to make people happy. I wanted people to like me, and I was afraid that if I shared my faith that they wouldn't like me. So, you know, I had my church friends, and I had my church life, my church mask, my New Hope Youth mask, and then I had my school mask, my football mask, my wrestling mask, my friends who weren't Christian mask, my Jrotc mask. Who I was, or who I was with, dictated who I was and who I pretended to be. So I grew up in a military family. Both my grandpas, all of my great-grandpas, cousins, uncles were all in the military. It was always something that I desired to do from a young age. I like to look at the way that God wired me as like a sheepdog. I'm calm, cool, and collected most of the time. I love the sheep, which are like the people that I care for, people that are close to me. I can blend in with the sheep, and that's me the majority of the time. But when a wolf comes around, I can turn into a wolf myself real quick. And some of you girls may have seen this at camp for a little bit. I try and suppress that, but I know Kirsten has at times. I'm fiercely loyal and protective to those that I care about and the things that I value. So a sheepdog is someone who's willing to step up and defend those who can't defend themselves because either they're unable, they're unwilling, or they're unskilled enough to do so. That's the way that God wired me. That's the way that He created me, alright? And if that's not the way that you're wired, that's okay. That's just the way that God created me. So I grew up as a young boy seeing videos and hearing all the talk about 9/11. I know 9/11 is so far removed from most of you guys, but listen, I grew up still hearing 9/11 being talked about on a regular basis. I grew up watching my uncles, watching my cousins get deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan. Several of them got deployed multiple times. I got to see one of my cousins who is in the Special Forces on like his third deployment. Pretty much every guy in his platoon died, and it messed with him. And I really looked up to Derek. I grew up watching on the news about what ISIS and Al-Qaeda and other terrorist organizations were doing to Christians. And you know, seeing that sheepdog mentality, that sheepdog kind of personality began to come out at a really early age. And if you guys know me, and when I see something that I think needs to change, when I see that there's a need, I can't just sit there and do nothing about it. When I would turn on the TV and I'd hear about another Christian city that got taken over by an extremist group, or when I'd hear about another mass murder of Christians on the other side of the world, I'm not the kind of guy that just sits there and says, oh man, that sucks. You know, I feel bad for them, or I'm going to pray. I wanted to do something about that. So it was like this like indescribable feeling that I would have every time that I see something like that. Every time that I see it or hear about it, I get more angry, more driven, more determined to do something about it. And I know this sounds crazy, maybe it sounds even funny, but even at a young age, I started to do everything that I could, I guess, to prepare or train for what I wanted to do, which was join the military. I know this sounds funny, but I took up hunting just so I could be a better marksman, just so I could shoot a gun better. Listen, no one in my family is a hunter, but I thought, you know, when I get in the military, I've got be able, and I wanted to go Special Forces. I wanted to be a better shot, so I got a job. The day that I could legally get a job in Iowa, and I started working and saving to buy myself guns and stuff to hunt with. That's how much I valued it. And if you guys have ever hunted before, you know hunting stuff's not cheap, especially to a young kid. And then I ended up joining this organization called Jrotc, which is a military organization for high school students. And I am a 3 on the Enneagram. And if you guys know what that means that I'm an achiever. I like to be the best at everything that I'm passionate about. Well, the military environment was perfect for this. Because I'm super competitive, and the military is competitive, and they're always trying to get the best out of you. I'm sure Jacob knows they're trying to get the best out of you, and if you perform, you get rewarded and you get recognized. So it was perfect for me. I thrived in this environment. And because of my personality, and because I was so passionate about this, I didn't just want to join the military. And I didn't just want to join the infantry. I didn't just want to be a ranger. I wanted to go Delta, which is a Tier 1 Special Force unit. It's the best of the best. And because this was my goal, and I knew how hard it was going to be to achieve that, I made it a point to be the best at every single thing that I could in our battalion. So I joined all the competitive teams. Joined the Raider team, the drill team, color guard. I was on the battalion staff, but that wasn't enough. I had to be the best on every single team. So I would have practice before and after school. I'd wake up every day of high school at 4 a.m. to go to practice. I'd be at practice by 4:30, and I'd have practice again in the afternoons. And I remember I was tired all the time. I was tired all the time because, I mean, waking up at 4 a.m. every day, I mean, that's not fun, right? And then you're a high school student on top of that, and you got practice in the afternoons. But I remember, so I'm trying to think of who can even relate to this. I mean, I suppose Callie, Tommy, some of like you older leaders, when we were like in high school, that was when like ISIS was at its peak. And it seemed like almost every single day you'd hear about another mass murder over in Iraq or Syria or something. And that was just like fuel for me. I used that as like fuel when I was tired, when I didn't feel like doing it anymore. That was my motivation. Thinking it's all gonna pay off one day. So I joined every single one of these teams, and I didn't just want to be the best myself. I wanted my team to be the best because I knew that my end goal was I wanted to be an officer. I wanted to be a leader in this Special Forces unit, and I'm gonna be real. I mean, I wanted revenge. I wanted to kill people. I was out for blood. That's just the reality. So I ended up joining. I joined Color Guard. And for those of you guys that don't know what Color Guard is, I got a picture up there on the screen. It's just a team with flags and rifles, and it's like a ceremony thing. And I did this that way I could pay attention to detail. That's our drill team. But I did Color Guard, and it was kind of cool. So not only did I do Color Guard, but like I said, on the first day of Color Guard practice, my freshman year in Jrotc, I was the commander of my team, and then I wanted my team to be the best. Didn't spell that much. It's all good. And because of that, I got to compete at national level competitions, competing at schools and battalions from all across the country, and we won most we went to. I got the opportunity to perform this at ceremonies for some big time people. I've done color guards for Trump, Obama, Bernie Sanders, Mike Huckabee, Rick Santorum. I actually plowed into the Iowa governor at one of them. I was commanding the squad, so I had a rifle at the front, and he was in my way, and you're not supposed to move, so I just literally plowed right into our governor. It was really funny. It was on Fox. Actually, I was on TV a lot for presidential stuff. And then I did drill team. And some of you guys may be like, what is drill team? Well, this is drill team. I've actually got a video, because we never really took videos of our competitions, but there's a video. I think it's the next slide. This is the Marine Corps drill team, and this is basically what we did. We did armed exhibition. No. It was the days before you could save Snapchat videos. Actually, I could probably find a video if I dug deep on YouTube on someone's page. But anyways, that's drill team. And like I said, I didn't just want to be the best of that. I wanted my team to be the best, and I wanted to be the leader of that team. So my freshman year, remember day one I walked in, I was like, I'm going to be the leader of this team. And we won every single competition that we competed at for the freshmen, but that still wasn't enough. So by my freshman year, I ended up commanding the senior squad, and we were still winning competitions at a national level. Then I joined the Raider team, and I did this for mental toughness. I know I've told you about this, but again, all of this is in my mind. I wanted to join the best special forces team that I could, and the Green Berets have a 70% dropout rate, and then the very best of the Green Berets are hand-selected to try out for Delta, and then 90% of them fail out. So it's about as hard as it possibly gets. Kirsten probably knows I was super undersized, especially as a freshman, all right? I was 90 pounds soaking wet as a freshman in high school, and pretty much all the guys that were on the Raider team, at least the starting team, were all seniors, and they were already in the National Guard. They had already been to basic. They're all grown men, like 6 foot 180. I was like 5'6", 90. But I still made it my point. I still made it a point to make the competitive team, and that was the hardest crap that I've ever done. All right, my nickname on the Raider team was Woodpecker. My first sergeant always said tougher than woodpecker lips. So Woodpecker, you guys call me Woodpecker. That's kind of funny. So I ended up making the team, and then by my second year, I ended up I was the leader of our Raider team and these competitions. But that still wasn't enough. I had to make sure that I was the best at everything on our team. I had to do the most push-ups. I had to do the most sit-ups, the most curl-ups. I had to run with a ruck the longest. I had to have the fastest mile time, the fastest 10K time. I had to run farther and faster carrying a litter. And by my last year, I would actually carry other people's rucks for them. And all of this was I just had this desire just to be the best that I possibly could be. I went to military camps over the summer to gain leadership skills and help with problem solving. And that still wasn't enough. That still wasn't enough for me. I was already the best at everything. And guys, I'm not saying this to try and brag. I'm just telling you guys, like, this is what I was going through. That still wasn't enough. I wanted to be the most decorated cadet in our battalion's history. I wanted to have more ribbons, more medals, more cords, more arcs than anyone else. I would literally do anything just to earn one more award. Simple things like having the best PT score in the battalion. And I would even do weird things. I would be like, oh, you can get a ribbon if you donate 2 gallons of blood while you're in high school? Yeah, I would go and donate blood, not to save people's lives. I did it to get another ribbon. Right? I was a sweat. 50 hours of community service? Yeah, I'd go and freaking pick up trash just so I could get one more ribbon. Listen, and I'm doing all this stuff, and I know it sounds crazy, but it felt good to me. There was no better feeling than me walking in to a drill meet. It's this national tournament. There's no better feeling than me driving, than us going down to, say, like, Fort Leonard Wood, or Fort Leavenworth, or Fort Jackson, or whatever, and going to this drill meet and standing in front of hundreds or thousands of other cadets. And you go out there and you receive the first place award for your team, you turn around and everyone's saluting you. That was a great feeling for me when I was in high school. It just kept on adding fuel to this fire, this desire to get better and be the best. This was my entire life. This is all I cared about when I was in high school. I ended up getting an Army and a Marine Corps ROTC scholarship, and this was like the icing on the cake. This is like, I'm like seeing like my dream in front of me, and this is like the next step. I'm like, yes, like I can go to any college that I want to for free. I was planning on doing what I did in high school with ROTC. I wanted to be the best in that. I was going to go to mountain school, airborne school, air assault school, all this stuff to prepare me. I was living on cloud 9. I was like, yeah, this is all paying off. It's all coming into fruition. All my hard work is paying off. And then one day, everything changed. I was deep in prayer. I was praying for one of my friends, and then God just spoke to me, and it was clear. It was about as audible as I've ever heard God's voice. He said, "You're going to be the youth pastor." And I said, heck no. Behind me, Satan just kept on saying, no, I want you to be a youth pastor. And I'm like, God, shut up. I'm not praying to you about this right now. I'm praying for my friends. I'm not going to hear this garbage. And he just kept on saying, no, I want you to be a youth pastor. Then instantly, I'm arguing with God. No, God. I'm not going to be a youth pastor. You know my dream. I want this more than anything. I want this more than anything to join the military. I'm not going to be a youth pastor. I started telling him all these reasons. I'm unqualified. I've never preached before. I'm not even really living a Christian lifestyle. I wouldn't be good at it. I can't afford private school without a big scholarship. So my parents have 4 kids. My dad's a teacher. My mom does in-home daycare. They can't pay to send me to school. And then God spoke to me, said, this is my path for you. And if you go be a youth pastor, I'll provide the funds. And I was like, whatever, dude. So I like break down crying. I'm like telling all my friends, I'm on this spiritual high for a while. But then how many of you guys know that you can have this Jesus moment at camp or a conference or something, you're on cloud 9, you're living up in the clouds, and you get back home and reality hits. Yeah. And you're like, oh shoot. Now what? How's this gonna look? You know, you got a lot of uncertainty. I remember calling the directors of the ROTC programs and telling them that I was turning down the scholarship, and they're like, what the heck? What's the matter with you? People are asking me questions because they're seeing this radical change in my life. Everyone knew that I was, you know, that I was going to go into the military, and then all of a sudden I'm like, no, I'm actually not. I'm going to be a youth pastor now. And they're like, what in the world? Now listen, I wasn't living like you would probably picture a youth pastor to live in high school, all right? I'm not saying I was the freaking class drug dealer, but you should have seen the reaction on people's faces when I told them that I was going to be a youth pastor. What? You? I didn't even know you were a Christian. You're going to be a youth pastor? You serious? Hey, Colt, listen up. It was embarrassing, honestly. I was ashamed. I felt like I had wasted all 4 years of high school. I felt like my dream was just crushed. It had all gone to waste. It was depressing. Listen, in my head I was like, yeah, like I've accepted this calling on my life, but this sucks. I don't like this. I was worried that all my Jrotc friends would look at me. I remember sitting, you know, whether we were hanging out before or after we'd be doing something, and like I said, most of my friends were already in the Army at that point, or they were sworn in, and they'd be talking about, you know, where they were going to go to basic that summer, or where they were, you know, going to go to AIT, or where they were going to get deployed. And I would just sit there in silence, you know, thinking about, wow, yeah, that was my dream. And I just sit there with them for a year. And I remember some of them I didn't even want to tell that I was going to be a youth pastor. They'd ask me, like, oh, you still planning on going to Texas A&M and doing ROTC there? Yep. Because I didn't have the heart to tell them. And I remember, you know, I had to find a Bible college to go to. And North Central was my first choice. Shout out Callie. I had a lot of friends that were there, and I thought it was awesome. I remember going there and visiting, and I was like, yeah, I want to go here. This, you know, it's not my dream, but you know, it'll be fun. And I remember God like told me, no, this is not where I want you to go. And I was like, dude, God, what the heck, bro? Like, I'm already going to be a youth pastor. I don't freaking want to do this. Let me at least go to school where I want to. No. It would have been cool. You know, maybe I could have met Callie a lot earlier, but whatever. I ended up at Evangel University, Springfield, Missouri. And you know, this is just one of many times where almost always when God puts a calling on your life, it never turns out like you pictured it would. God must have a sense of humor. You know, and I didn't think that I could afford it because, in case you didn't know, college is expensive, period, but private college is even more expensive, especially when you don't have any help from your parents. Not because my parents don't love me, but because they can't afford it. So it was $135,000 to go to college there. It's a lot of money, right? Listen, now I was the same age as some of you guys. So, Grace, what if you were like, okay, I got to come up with $135,000 to pay for my education. You can't get any help from anyone. You're like, crap, right? Plus, it's God's calling on your life, so you like have to do it, right? And you got to pay that off on a youth pastor's salary. Yikes. But I remembered God's promise. I remember God's calling. He said, if you go be a youth pastor, I will provide the funds. I wasn't sure how it happened, but I trusted Him. And I remember I ended up hearing about this huge scholarship that Evangel offers. It's the biggest scholarship that they offer. And I just thought, hey, what the heck, I'll apply for it. I hardly qualify for it, but I might as well. Well, I ended up getting invited out to go interview for it. And it was this whole thing. It was 2 days of interviews. And I remember seeing up on the wall when I walked in, on this TV screen, it said the average GPA and the average ACT score of the people that I was with. The average GPA was 4.6 and the average ACT was 33. It was a lot higher than either of my scores. So instantly I walked in and I'm like, I'm unqualified. I'm not going to get this. There's no way. I don't have a shot. But I remember I spoke to my senior Army instructor, Colonel Bennett, and I was telling him about the interview that I had coming up. And he told me, wear your Class A's. And I'm like, my Class A's? Why would I wear my Class A's? This isn't a military thing. He's like, just trust me. Wear your Class A's, and it'll make you stand out. And people are going to ask you about it. You tell them exactly why you're wearing that uniform and why you're there for that interview. I think I actually have a picture of me and my Class A's up on the screen. So, like I said, I was a sweat. I had ribbons going down my back. And sure enough, I showed up there, and you know, everyone else that was there for the interviews, they were all looking dapper, you know, wearing their suits, and girls in their super fancy dresses. But ain't nobody stood out like me. You know, and all the professors, all the students asked me about it, and essentially I got to tell them what I just told you guys in the last 10-15 minutes. And I was uncertain of how it would turn out. You know, I did the interviews with a bunch of really, really smart kids. And I went home, I drove back to Iowa, and we got a letter in the mail a couple of weeks later from Evangel. You know, held my breath as I opened it up. And I ended up getting more than I even thought that they could give in the scholarship. A scholarship that I thought I had no chance of earning. They ended up giving me way more than I thought they even could. And it was crazy. I remember sitting in my kitchen and I almost audibly heard God say, "Told you so." I ended up talking to my professors who interviewed me a year or two later, because I remembered them. I mean, how could you ever forget someone's face who gave you that much money when you have none? And they told me that the reason that they gave me that money is because they were both vets in the Army who became pastors, who then became professors. And the reason why they gave me that was because of my testimony. Because my testimony was powerful, and they could see that God had a calling on my life. And because of that scholarship, I was able to go to Evangel. God used a piece of my broken past that I was ashamed of, that I didn't want to talk about, that I didn't even want to think about because it still hurt, that I thought was dead.
Yeah.
And he said, no, don't throw that away. I can still use that.
Yeah.
I can still use that. That dream that you had, that you think crumpled before you, no, don't throw that away. I'm going to use that for good. No, it's not over yet. It's not over yet. Watch this. Watch me work. Because He's the God who works all things together for good. It says that in Romans 8:28, Paul writes, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose." Maybe that's you tonight. Maybe you feel like God's got a calling on your life. God's put a calling on your life. Maybe it's something as big as you being a missionary, or full-time ministry, being a worship pastor. Or maybe it's just you feel like God's calling you to share your faith with your friends at school. And because of your past, because of the mistakes you've made, you feel like you're unqualified. You feel like you aren't good enough. You feel like because you struggle with depression, you can't fulfill the calling that God has placed on your life. Because you struggle with anxiety, or because you have addictions, or because your parents aren't Christian, because you told lies, because what people have said about you, because what people at school say about you, because of what you think about yourself, you think you're unqualified for God's calling on your life. There are people in here tonight who feel that exact same way. I just want to encourage you guys tonight. Just because you got a broken past, just because you may feel ashamed of who you used to be, just because you may be walking in unknown territory right now, where it's scary and you don't know what's coming next. You know that you're trying to walk on the path that God has called you to, but you don't know what's coming and you feel like you're alone. God has not forgotten you. God will never leave you. He will never forsake you, and He will take something that you thought that was dead and He's going to use it for His glory. Like you don't even belong to the church. There's so many guys who, you guys got invited to youth tonight, you're like, dude, church isn't the place for me. Man, if these people only knew who I was when I'm at school or when I'm at home, man, I've messed up so much. I don't belong here. Some of you guys are maybe sitting here, and you're like, dude, I didn't even know that 2 Corinthians was a book in the Bible. Maybe you're like, dude, that Moses guy you were talking about, Abraham, Jonah, Jacob, I didn't even know there were people in the Bible. I thought they were just your buddies from college. That's all right. There might be someone in here, you don't know a single scripture in the Bible. But that's okay, because you still belong here. Because Paul says, you're judging by appearances. If anyone is confident that they belong to Christ, they should consider again that we belong to Christ just as much as they do. Meaning that maybe you just accepted Jesus 2 weeks ago. Maybe 3 weeks ago, your life looked completely differently. You belong to Jesus just as much as I do. Just as much as anyone in here does. Verse 8, we continue on. It says, so even if I boast somewhat freely about the authority, I'm trying to see it up on here, about the authority the Lord gave for us, building you up rather than tearing you down, I will not be ashamed of it. I do not want to seem to be trying to frighten you with my letters. For some say his letters are weighty and forceful, but in person, he's unimpressive, and his speaking amounts to nothing. Next slide. Such people should realize that what we are in our letters when we are absent, we will be in our actions when we are present. They do not dare to classify or compare ourselves with some who commend themselves. When they measure themselves by themselves and compare themselves with themselves, they are not wise. We, however, will not boast beyond proper limits, but will confine our boasting to the sphere of service God Himself has assigned to us, a sphere also that includes you. Meaning that your past or the way that people look at you does not dictate the validity of God's calling on your life. Listen, this is Paul. This is the guy who studied under the most famous rabbi in the world, the guy who was a Roman citizen. And look at what these chumps are saying about him. They're like, oh, it was in the last slide. They're like talking smack about him. Next one over, I think. Yeah, here we go. His letters are weighty and forceful, but in person he's unimpressive. Listen, this is the guy who's the most famous person in the New Testament besides Jesus. This is the guy who traveled from continent to continent preaching the gospel. And these dingleberries are like, yeah, his words are weighty and forceful, but in person he's kind of unimpressive. Come on. They're saying that about Paul here. And what's interesting is Paul's response to that. When Paul defends himself, he doesn't list his credentials. He says, the reason why I'm confident is because I belong to Christ. I know who I belong to. He didn't list off, oh, I studied under this person and I've got these credentials, this many people have come to know Jesus from me. He didn't say any of that. He said, listen, I belong to Christ, so I don't got to answer to none of y'all. And listen, reading this was a reality check for me, because my whole mindset in high school was competing against others and competing against myself. Like I said, that was my entire mindset. I wanted to be the best, I wanted to be recognized as the best, but let me tell you, that's not what ministry is about. That is not what ministry is about. I'd eat some humble pie. Yeah, apple pie. Apple humble pie. So listen, what we can get from this is that whatever God calls you to, whatever calling God has placed on your life, whether that's a calling into ministry, whether that's a calling you share your faith, maybe it's a calling for you to be a nurse or a teacher, it doesn't matter what people say about you, it doesn't matter what you think about yourself, it doesn't matter if you think you're good enough, because whatever giant God places in front of you, whatever obstacle is in front of you, God is within you, and the God that is within you is greater than whatever it is you're going up against. So it's saying that we can boast in the calling that God has given us. Meaning that we should be proud about what God's calling you to do. Listen, if you feel like God's calling you to be a worship pastor, you should be proud of that. If you feel like God's calling you to be a missionary, you should be proud of that. If you feel like God's telling you to share the love of Jesus with your parents, you should be proud of that. You should boast in that. Because there's this confidence that comes from knowing who you belong to. There's a big difference between boasting in Christ and boasting about yourself. But it's a powerful thing when you have that confidence knowing that you belong to Christ. That allowed Moses to hold a stick in his hand that is completely insufficient to part the Red Sea. But when it's activated in faith, it became enough to drown an entire enemy army. So whatever God has placed, whatever calling God has placed in your life, you got to look at it through a different level. Just like if it's a little boy's lunch, it's not even enough to feed a whole person. It's not even enough to feed a whole person. You got to look at it and go, if I can just get this into the hands of Jesus, if I can just get this to Jesus, what could He do with it? Multiply it. That's right. Good job, Colton. And not only is it enough to feed everybody, not only is it enough for everyone to have a buffet, but it's enough to have leftovers. And not just that, but it's going to set the stage for you to believe that every time that God puts you in a situation where you feel like you're not enough, you have history with Him to know. So I'm in these youth ministry classes. I'm in Bible college, right? Feeling unqualified. Writing these Bible papers. Yuck. I didn't even know that there was that many books on the Bible. I used to have like 20 stinking books on my desk about the Bible and stuff. And God's growing me and stretching me. He's placing professors and friends in my life to grow me. But listen, it wasn't an overnight thing. You know, when I got to Evangel, I was not living like a youth pastor. I did not have what it takes, but it wasn't just like an overnight thing where I was just like, yeah, like, okay, God, I accept this calling on my life. Now everything is going to be great. Listen, I messed up a lot. I could write a book on all the things that I messed up on, all the things that I thought about ministry that weren't right. I made mistakes, but I made little steps forward every day and week and year. And I want you to know that just because you have a calling on your life doesn't mean you have to be perfect. Just because you have a calling on your life doesn't mean you're going to have it all figured out right away. You're going to mess up. It wasn't until Moses was 80 years old that he finally stepped into the calling that God placed on his life. And listen, that's the reason why we need Jesus. That's the reason why we need God's grace. Because we're not good enough. We're not good enough. We need God's grace. Listen, God's never going to call you to something that makes Him unnecessary. If you're sitting there and you're wondering if something's coming from God or not, think about if you can do it on your own or not. God will never call you to something that makes Him unnecessary. So I'm wrapping up here. I'm going to invite the worship team to come back up. As I get closer to graduating from Bible college, I'm exploring different opportunities, places that I can pastor in. And people would always ask me, where's your dream job? Where do you think you're going to end up? And my answer was always the same. Well, I don't really have a dream job, but I'd love to end up in Iowa. And if I could choose, I'd be a youth pastor at New Hope. And it was crazy. I mean, my home youth group was called New Hope. Yeah, you'll see that God has a sense of humor. So I wanted to be in Iowa. All my friends and family were from Iowa. Iowa's the best. Kirsten was there. It was a plus. And I figured that, hey, God, like, I listened to you. I went to school to be a youth pastor. He's at least going to let me pick where I'm going to serve, right? Nope. He did not. So I went and I started visiting churches back home, talking with pastors. And every single pastor that I talked to, it was like a huge red flag. It was like a door slammed shut. Like, it was so clear that that's not where God wanted me. And I was like, man, what in the world? I wanted to live in Iowa so bad. And there was a lot of confusion my senior year. And I remember I was sitting in my dorm room. And I get this phone call from the head of the youth ministries department. It's early in the morning. He's like, hey, there's a senior pastor here. He's only here for a couple of hours and he wants to meet with you. And I'm like, oh boy, when? He's like, right now. I'm like, oh, okay. So I put on clothes, go and meet up with him. Tells me his name's Phil. And I'm like, okay, cool, Phil. And he starts telling me about his church. He's asking about myself. And it was like every single checklist for what I wanted from a senior pastor, every single checklist for what I wanted in a church was just being checked off. But the only thing that I wasn't sure of is that he said that it was a church plant. Said that there wasn't a youth group. And I was like, shoot. Because the only experience that I had with churches, I've only gone to very well-established churches, big churches. My home youth group has 300 kids in it. The youth group that I served at in college has over 1,000. That's the only church environment that I've ever been in. So when he said it's a church plant, we're meeting at a school, there is no youth group, I was like, yo, like, this sounds like a great church, and like, you know, like I love that, but dude, I don't know, I feel like I'm unqualified. I don't know anything about a church plant or what that would look like. So I'm praying about it, and I felt like that's where God was leading me. It was very clear. And you know, it wasn't just that I'd never been a part of a church plant. I never even thought about the idea of being a part of a church plant. I was afraid that I was going to fail. That if I tried it, I'd come out here and I wouldn't know what to do and I'd fail. But I knew that this is where God was leading me. And I felt like God spoke to me and he said, you don't need to feel qualified when you're called. You don't need to feel like you're good enough when you're called. Just like Abraham, I'm unqualified. Just like Peter, I cut off a couple of ears, but I'm still I'm still called. You know, I slip sometimes, but I'm still called. So I ended up accepting the position, and I moved down here, nervous and excited at the same time, and then COVID hit. And you know how that affected all of us, right? And this made me even more uncertain. So not only was I already uncertain about moving down here, but now I was like, oh, we don't have a place to meet for church anymore. Oh, I know you moved here to be a youth pastor, but you can't meet with the kids. And I was like, crap. I'm like, God, I thought you wanted me to come here. What in the world? What am I doing? Is this the right decision? God, what did you get me into? And then the icing on the cake, I get an email on the day that I moved down here, the money that I still owe on my student loans. Because even though I got a big scholarship that allowed me to go there, I still had a decent amount of debt. And then I was just like, God, do you want me here? God, is this really where you want me? Because everything's been going pretty crappy so far. What in the world is going on? God, I remember you said that you would provide the funds if I became a youth pastor. I mean, I guess you did most of it, so I guess that's good enough. And I'm not kidding you. On the second day that I lived here, I got a phone call from a random number talking about an opportunity where if you work for a non-profit organization, which is a church, you make under a certain amount of money, I qualify, youth pastor gang, that you get your loans forgiven, completely forgiven. And it was like God just said in my ear, I still see you. I haven't forgotten my promise. That calling that I put on your life 6 years ago, that promise that I made you when you were only 17, when I was the same age as a lot of you, I haven't forgotten about that. Those loans didn't surprise me, because He's the God who will never forsake us, who's with us through our highs and lows. And I feel like there's someone in here who's on their journey with God. You're trying to follow that calling that He's put on your life. Maybe it's sharing your faith with your friends. Maybe it's pursuing ministry. Maybe it's to be a nurse or a teacher. Whatever it is, God put a calling on your life and you've tried to walk towards it, but maybe you feel unqualified. You feel like you're not good enough. There's obstacles coming up in the road and you're like, man, maybe it wasn't God. Maybe that was just in my head. Maybe you feel like you're on your own right now. I just want to encourage you. And I feel like God told me to tell you that God's never going to leave you. God's never going to forsake you. God remembers His promises and the plans that He has made for you. And even though you might not know what the next step is that God has for your life, that He's always with you. So I invite you guys to stand up.